Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Muskets and Tomahawks 2. So this is the second edition of Muskets and Tomahawks. It's now a nice hardcover book instead of the last edition's sort of flimsy one. That's an expansion, but it's the same style as the last edition. So I think it may have been the first review that I did was Muskets and Tomahawks. It's actually the first historical game that I played, so I've got quite an attachment to Muskets and Tomahawks. I have quite a large French Indian War collection, provincials painted up as New York. I have French, British, tons of Indians, militia, everything, coureur de bois. So I'm very fond of the French Indian War period. I should make more videos on the French and Indian War, but I just do not have the time. If you haven't seen how these work, it's understandable. I haven't posted in a while, but the way they work is 5 good things, 5 things I like, 3 things that are sort of, maybe I don't dislike them, but maybe I'm not the biggest fan of them, and then 1 thing that sort of sets it apart from everything else. So let's get to it. Number 1, spotting has been simplified. In the old rules, there were rules for spotting. There were ways to spot units, but it was 3 charts. Well, it was 1 chart with three lines, and it depended on the open, in dense terrain, in light terrain, and no one ever really used it because it got too cumbersome. The charts were very hard to understand. The rules were sort of seen as optional, and more often than not, you were just always spotting the enemy at the same time. But with the new way spotting works and the new rules for spotting, it's all been condensed into 1 chart. It's had all the modifiers that have been expanded to basically include pretty much every circumstance you can think of. Now there are penalties for being shot at by units you can't see. They may have existed before, but since no one ever used them, they didn't really matter. So now there is definitely benefit for sticking a unit of riflemen in a dense thing of trees at the way back of the board and sniping across the table. Number 2, command points. Command points are a completely new thing. They allow you to do things that things like putting units on Overwatch, putting units on, well, you know what Overwatch is. Sort of. I'm going to bank my activation for later. It lets you pause one of your cards. We'll get the cards in a second, but if you have a card that you really like, that you want to use a bit later in the turn, maybe you can pause it, although you run the risk of the turn ending and then you lose that card. Command points are gained by, you can buy them at the start of the game, but I don't imagine many people are going to do that. They're gained by playing your opponent's card, which we're going to get to later, but suffice to say, command points are a new tactical element. I'm not a big fan of the whole game within the game thing. I prefer to just play games, but I think command points are a good addition, and I look forward to seeing how people are going to use them while playing games. Number 3, the book looks a lot nicer. I know it's really not maybe a game thing, but it's definitely a presentation thing, and it's something someone looks at when they pick up a game. The old book was black and white, except for the front page and the back page, the front cover and back cover actually, inside and out. And so you picked up this book, and you're looking for uniforms, and all you saw was it wasn't a nice looking book. This book is much better. It's much nicer. It has quite a nice cover, of course. Well, we'll get to that later. But this book is beautifully well done. You can see some Indian mutiny troops there, and goes on to the American Civil War and what looks like more French Indian War at the top. Sorry, probably hit the microphone. But the book just looks phenomenally better. Hardcover is, I prefer the hardcover book just because it's more sturdy. The expansion books are done in the old staple together flexible style, but again, look at that. Look how beautiful that is. It just does look much better. Whole pages dedicated to showing miniatures off like that. It's just phenomenal. So yes, the new edition, the book's much nicer, much easier to give to someone, and they don't just put it down straight away because I think it's some sort of cheapy thing that someone just knocked together in 5 minutes. Number 4, the way that reloading and vigilance works. So The way reloading works is you basically don't do it. In the old system, you would elect a unit to shoot, and no matter how many people fired, you would put a marker in front of them to show that they'd fired. In the new system, or the new edition, you can opt to fire half the men and do 0 reloads, or you can fire all of them and put a reload token down. So I like the option to almost conserve your fire, to sort of have lines. I imagine this will mostly be used with lines at long range, to just pick off the enemy, or have your skirmishers half your riflemen firing, while, instead of using up your precious 2 reload rifles. I like the way that they've done the smoke now. In the past, you would use smoke. Just cotton wool balls were used for black powder tokens, which were the reload markers. Now you put actual smoke tokens in front, and these make you easier to spot, and can have other effects too. So basically, it encourages you to make your game look much better by putting those cotton wool balls down. Stretch them out a little bit, make them look like nice smoke, rather than just using them normally. Vigilance I quite like, because so many times you would you get the situation where it's like, okay, I've taken, say, in the old system you got both of your regular cards out and you couldn't do anything, you couldn't react for the rest of the turn, and someone just ran down a road towards you. It's not really realistic. I mean, someone running straight at you down a road, you're going to shoot at them. So with the Vigilance thing, if you get bad cards, you can sort of say, okay, it's kind of a waste of a turn, but I'm going to use my command points here to set this unit up on Overwatch, so that if somebody does try and get them, they're at least able to fire back somewhat, even if they can't, act to their full potential. Number 5, expansion-specific events. So remember before I said there were expansions, I said we get to that later. Well, this is now. The main rulebook has no profiles in it. The main rulebook is just the main rules, and a couple of scenarios, which are sort of, I think it's 3 scenarios. These are full of unit profiles. This is Redcoats and Tomahawks, which is the only one out right now. French-Indian War, American Revolution, War of Independence, and the War of 1812. And you can see which war the units go in by the little circles next to the unit entry. So you see the American artillery. Obviously, there were no Americans in the French and Indian War. Those would be the provincials, which you can see here can be taken in all 3 wars by the British. So, Galloping Major, that's my miniatures there too. Those aren't mine, but the same brand. Galloping Major is my favorite for American provincials. Anyway, specific events. So, the scenarios are tailored for the wars. So, for example, in this expansion, we're in North America during the from 1750 up until about 1815. In fact, exactly until 1815. So the skirmishes we're playing here are more burn the farmstead, slaughter the village, kidnap people, take the loot, scout the area. Whereas in somewhere like Napoleonic Spain, you might be doing more escort missions, you might be doing more authorized official things, scouting, escorting people, making contact with locals to get liaisons with them, picking up informants, that sort of thing. Whereas in the American backwoods, it's much different types of scenarios. You're probably not going to play the same scenarios in the French and Indian War as you would during the Indian Mutiny, and you're absolutely certainly not going to play the same scenarios in the Martist War as you are in the Indian Mutiny. And there is a Martist War supplement, at least a colonial supplement, coming out for these. They show pictures of Zulu war troops, and they have a mention of Martist troops, which really excited me. So yeah, so the individual expansion books have their own scenarios. They have their own events. So the events of the French and Indian War, the random events that come up, are going to be different to the random events of the Crimean War, of the Afghans on the northwest frontier. It's probably a bit unlikely for a giant monsoon rain to start pouring down on the Afghan frontier out of season. So North America is a little bit more believable. So one thing that I'm sort of a bit iffy on is the whole cards in the hand. In the old rules, there was a way to do this where it was it's an expanded rule. I personally never used it, where instead of just blind dealing the card from the shared deck, you could have some in your hand, but now that's a default way to play. So you draw 3 cards into your hand, I believe it's 3, and they can be your cards or the enemy's cards. And this is how you gain command points. If you have, say, you have enemy regulars 1, your regulars 1, and then enemy militia 2, or irregulars 2. If you play your own card, that's just normal. You just played your own card. However, if you play the enemy's card, you also gain a command point. It's essentially, it's supposed to be this sort of system of, you know, do I get a command point or do I take my own action? Although I think a lot of times it's going to be, let me just put a bunch of your cards out at the start of the game, bank up my command points, and then I'll use them whenever. So I think games within games that I dislike, because you can always sort of see them just become either way too much of the game or basically non-existent in the game. And yeah, that's a little pet peeve of mine. Number 2, deployment points. I'm not a fan of these deployment points in this system. In Sharp Practice, I like them because it was always done like that. There were always deployment points. There were ways deployment points work. Chain of Command, Sharp Practice. Infamy is actually really good with deployment points. That one later. But in Muskets and Tomahawks, it was less a... Deployment points have their own feel, and the sort of skirmish phase in Chain of Command is a good example of how I like to use deployment points properly. Well, not properly, I shouldn't say that, but you know, the way I like them to be used. So it's sort of like a game before the game, but a game, not a game in the game, but a game before the game. Whereas in Muskets and Tomahawks, it's sort of like you're just putting down deployment points and then you're restricted to there. Whereas in the old rules, you could just have the standard 40k style deployment zone, which I'm more of a fan of. I just find with deployment points in a game like this, what happens is you go, oh, well, I'll put my regulars down, and you put down 20 red codes. And then you want to go put your irregulars down, but you can't physically fit them in around the tiny little deployment point, or you have so many deployment points, you might as well just be deploying in a table half. You know what I mean? It's sort of... In a game like this, where it's almost like a... I mean, some of these scenarios have 4, 5, 6, I think I saw 7 deployment points per side. So essentially you're just deploying wherever you want on the table, in which case just deploy wherever you want on the table and get rid of deployment points. Or you're bottlenecking yourself and it just gets a little weird. So I'm not the biggest fan of deployment points in this particular game. Number 3, there was no quick reference sheet with the game. This is not a huge thing because there's one online obviously available. And I think there was one in the very back of the book somewhere. But anyway, I like to have a quick reference sheet, normally card or something you can laminate to just have loose floating. Not a huge thing. It's just something that I got used to with the last edition because someone printed one out and gave it to me. So I'm always used to playing Muskets and Tomahawks with a quick reference sheet. And so I was a little disappointed when I didn't get one in this edition, but it's not a huge deal. So, what makes the game unique? Well, this is the thing that if you hated this entire game, you would love it when you find out about this last thing. They're called side plots. Side plots should be in every game. I'm a big fan of these things. I think you should use them in 40k, you should use them in Age of Sigmar, you should use them in Bolt Action, Chain of Command, you should use them in Flames of War, you should use them in any game you play, should have some sort of side plot in it. The way side plots work, it's the best way to describe it. Okay, so I found this quite funny. In most games, you'll see the thing like the famous War Machine "Don't be a dick" rule, where it's like play nice and don't insult the other people. The guys at Studio Tomahawk, who are the guys who make Saga, by the way. Some people make Saga. Studio Tomahawk. Decided to go the other route. They trust their players are going to be nice and decent to one another. So they actually encourage you to bully people who do not pick side plots, to make them serve the drinks of the game night, to get them to maybe cook while everyone else is still playing, just so that, you know, they really know that you should be picking side plots. So what a side plot is it's a secondary objective. So it shifts the win. You know, a major win becomes a minor win becomes a draw. You know how it works. Both players have them, and they're optional. But if you take them, you get a 1 per use game benefit. So once per game, you can automatically pass a morale check, or once per game, you can re-roll a dice of some kind. It's very small, but it's a little benefit for picking a side plot. So what are they? Are these like grand things, or are they just minor things? Well, it depends. There are now 5 charts. So, the game is D10 system. The game is moved to a D10 system. I should have mentioned that. The game is D10 based now, so there are now 5 charts with 10 results on each chart. So there are now 50 individual side plots, ranging from you have a cipher, so roll dice to try and crack the cipher, to your officer has to be killed in close combat, to your officer has to kill someone else in close combat. Your officer might hate the men in that unit and want them all killed. He might love the men in that unit and want none of them killed. He might be, one of the houses might actually be his house or a relative's house, and so you can't let that house be attacked by the enemy. Or maybe the house belongs to someone else. And anyway, you get what I mean. They're just little story elements to the game. Your officer might be an old man, so he's reduced movement, reduced combat ability. That's a hindrance on you that you're going to have to deal with. Your officer's very old. Your officer could be drunk and he might have missed the battle. So you've got to roll for reserves for him to even show up. The men might hate him. The men might love him. He might be doing some sort of side mission of his own. One of them is to hand a letter to an enemy officer. So you've got to get your officer in contact with an enemy, hand a letter off, and then get out of there. I think the side plot should be used in everything. Can you imagine you sit down, you play your 40k game, and you realize that your Space Marine commander is actually a mortal enemy of the guy on the other side. So the enemy commander. So he's fought him a bunch of times and he wants to kill that guy in close combat. There you go, you've just added a whole narrative element to your game. Or perhaps you get your guardsman commander out and you realize the guy's a coward and he can't be too far from another unit to soak up a bunch of bullets. So that's another element to your game. You can no longer do those heroic commander rushes or something like that because your guy's a coward. Or maybe he's the complete opposite and he's going to have to get killed in melee combat and perhaps risk your overall command and control to fulfill the side objective. Because if you draw the game and you didn't fulfill your side objective because you ignored it, because it was something terrible, and your opponent did fulfill theirs, they will win that game. So I think side plots should be used in quite a lot of games. A big fan of them. Definitely it's worth picking up. I believe it's definitely worth picking up the main book just for the side plots alone. All the side plots are in here, so they're universal. Scenario events are in the scenario books. So, for example, my favorite event ever is the farmer with the shotgun. So one house just has a farmer in it with a shotgun who just shoots at the closest unit every turn, which is hilarious when it's an officer and he fills him full of buckshot and kills him. So the events are very funny and the side plots are also very great. So they're two things that make the game really unique. So thank you very much for watching. I'm a big fan of Muskets and Tomahawks 2. Let me know what you think of the review, and stay tuned for a review of Infamy from Two Fat Lardies. Another great thing about historical games like this is if you buy Muskets and Tomahawks 2, buy a bunch of minis, and then you realize you hate the game, and use them for sharp practice or something else. So don't be afraid to try new games, and let me know if you'd like me to review any other games in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.